Hi, everyone. Welcome to the lecture on genetic enhancements. Um, what we're going to be talking about today is the ethical issues surrounding different kinds of enhancement, and we're going to talk more about what that is. Let me just say something about the sort of theses. So, the thesis, in some way, is a kind of very broad analysis of many different topics and many different types of enhancement. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the lecture into two parts, and I'm going to discuss first, give an introduction to the topic, talk about some distinctions. I will talk about the first two kinds of enhancement, and then I will leave the other three. There's five in total for the second part of the lecture. So let me begin. So the theses, the articles, the title is Ethical Issues in Human Enhancement by Bostrom and Roache, two authors here. Now, we have, again, the thesis is not a very specific, narrow kind of argumentative paper. It's kind of a broad analysis. And we're going to be discussing five different types of enhancement. One has to do with life expansion. So instead of living 80 years, we're talking about now living 90, 100, maybe 1,000 years. Second, physical enhancement, literally improving our physical capabilities. There's a long discussion about professional athletes and using enhancement in the competition arena, and we know a little bit about that. So, our abilities to run faster. To stamina, increase our stamina, things like this through sorts of artificial means like medication or prescription drugs or even physical, procedures, medical procedures. The third one is mood and personality enhancement. So in this case, it would be maybe some sort of medication that people take. The example in the book is Prozac. It's a treatment for depression, but it also has side effect of increasing maybe your becoming more extroverted and improving your personality as well in some cases. Number four is cognitive enhancement. So, for instance, there are medications that help improve, like Ritalin, for instance, helps improve your focus and concentration. Normally, this is prescribed for people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but it can also have the side effect of improving your cognitive abilities. There's also memory sorts of medications that improve your cognitive abilities. And finally, the last one is selecting the best babies. This has to do with reproduction and it concerns the ethical issues surrounding genetically enhancing embryos. Okay. So those five areas, the book discusses the five areas. And let me just say now something about some distinctions that we need to keep in mind. So the most important distinction that most of the arguments here are going to rest on is this distinction between therapy and enhancement. So when we think about therapy, we think about situations in which people have a certain deficiency. People have a problem of some sort, either a cognitive problem or a physical problem. And therefore their level of performance is below average or is not normal. Let's put it that way, not normal. So therapy is some sort of medical intervention that helps the patient bring their performance, whatever it is, their either cognitive or physical performance, up to par, right? So it's helping fix a problem. The idea of therapy, the concept of therapy is not problematic at all. and the sort of connotation is very is accepted as a positive thing in the medical field. However, enhancement is very different because enhancement has a different connotation. Enhancement is not fixing of a problem or a deficiency, but rather it is a kind of privileged conception. It's sort of taking the patient or the person above and beyond sort of the normal. And so what you're doing is you're making a better and improved human being, right? You are intervening through some sort of artificial advanced technology or medical procedures or prescription drugs to allow this person to have sort of superhuman powers, okay? And that is ethically controversial, you see. So you see, I hope that is clear, right? So there's this sort of first apparent distinction between therapy and enhancement, and the idea is that enhancements are kind of seen as ethically controversial, right? Because they're not necessary, and because it raises questions about fairness and about the future and about equity and justice and things of that nature, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, the book, and you need to read this carefully because the authors go into detail about arguing that this presumably clear distinction between therapy and enhancement is not in reality as clear as people think it is. And what their argument is going to show, or what they intend to show, is that the distinction between therapy and enhancement is not as clear and is ambiguous and doesn't map on well to the medical field. If we think about what happens, what doctors do to patients, we realize that many of these things do not fall nice and neatly into one of these categories. In fact, there's a large gray area. And many procedures can be either interpreted as therapy or enhancement. So that already kind of says, well, if the procedure is not clear, if we can't state clearly that the procedure is either an enhancement or a therapy, then it's questionable whether the procedure is unethical or ethical if we think about, enhancements as something morally wrong and therapy as something morally right. So let me just give you a couple of examples. So, for instance, vaccines. This is an example that the author uses. So vaccines are, of course, not natural. These are, human-made, procedures that have been created to improve our immunization system so that we can become sort of physically stronger, more immune to diseases. And this fits into many categories. It could fit into a physical enhancement. It could also fit into a life extension enhancement. So vaccines allow us to live longer and make us physically stronger human beings, okay? Now, they also protect us against diseases, and so they're therapeutic in some ways, but they're certainly also they're a kind of enhancement as well. So this is an example that doesn't seem to fit nicely. Think also about some simple ideas like, for instance, glasses, right? So glasses are a form of therapy insofar as if you have deficient vision, So contact lenses or glasses could help you, are therapeutic insofar as they bring you up to par. But if you have LASIK surgery, you see, then you're intervening in a kind of permanent way and in a more invasive way. And this seems to be more like a enhancement, right? It seems to be an improvement of some sort that makes you above and beyond. You're not just, the guy with the glasses. Now you've had a procedure that has permanently modified your physical being and made you a better, improved human in some ways, improved your physical abilities. Um, Again, think of drugs, that people use, for instance, for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, like Ritalin. Well, are you treating a deficiency, a disease, uh, an illness, or are you enhancing a human being? It seems like you could be doing both, right? Because we know that Ritalin improves your cognitive abilities and your ability to focus and to concentrate. So again, the important point here is, and you need to read this in detail and sort of hash out all the arguments here. But the important point that the authors want to make is that the seemingly clear distinction, conceptual distinction between therapy and enhancement, in reality, when you go into the practice of the medical profession, it's not that clear. And this is going to affect the ethical arguments, right? Okay, the next thing that has to do with the definitions is we should get clear about what are bioconservatives and the transhumanists. So the bioconservatives are those who are anti-enhancement position. They believe that we should not in any way genetically or even medically intervene to enhance human beings. They think this is ethically wrong. Medicine and genetic intervention should be limited and focused only on therapeutic treatments and not on enhancements. Okay, so those are the bioconservatives. The transhumanists are much more liberal about the idea of enhancement. They believe they are pro-enhancement. They believe that there's nothing wrong with intervening or with using advanced technologies in medicine or in prescription drugs to improve human either cognitive or physical or life expectancies. So enhancing, making the human being better through artificial advanced medical procedures. So we have the transhumanists and the bioconservatives. Now, in this video, I'm going to talk about two types of enhancement. One is enhancing lifespan, and the other one is physical enhancement. These are, I can't go into all the details, into all the arguments. You have to read them carefully. But, the basic idea is life, there's a lot of overlap here. So therapeutic kinds of procedures are also enhancing lifespan, because if we help cure cancer, if we help cure heart failure and diabetes and so on and so forth, then this is going to improve lifespan. But as the book points out, even if we were to cure the two most prominent forms of diseases, which are cancer and heart cardiovascular disease, even if we could stop those two, life expectancy would probably not increase that much. In other words, people might live longer, but maybe 7, 8, in average, 9 years longer. And why is this? Well, because there is one problem, and that medicine has not been able to cure, and that is aging. Okay, even if we cure diseases, people still get old, and people will die of old age. Our cells will deteriorate and age. So the question is, if it's possible to stop this wearing down of the cells and aging process, would it be something that is ethically, morally acceptable? So that is the question. Should we stop aging if we could? And that's a kind of interesting and fun idea to think about and to talk about. If you could live 100, 200 years, 1,000 years, first of all, would this be something good for human beings? If it's not good for human beings, it might not be ethical or the right thing to do. It'd be kind of weird to live 1,000 years, right? Because we would have to rethink our whole existence and the meaning of our existence. But certainly this is possible. Some people argue that this is not a good idea, that this would take away the meaning of life. What brings meaning to our existence in some way is the idea that we don't live for a very long time, and that in some ways, we have one very short adolescent period, we have one short, young, and then middle age, and everything goes by really quick, and there is a sense in which you have a career, maybe two, but not very many careers. You can't be a doctor, lawyer, professor, teacher, salesperson. You can't have 17 careers in a lifetime and do them well. And so there is something about like the idea that you have only a short period of time in this world that makes everything so meaningful, right? Now, if you had 1,000 years, there's a sense in which that would bring a kind of boredom almost, right? A kind of meaninglessness, the meaninglessness of life, because they would take away a little bit of your ambitions to some extent, right? You have 1,000 years, you have time. It would affect certainly your family. How many families would you have? How many careers would you have? Anyways, I think we could think about these issues. We don't, I will allow you to explore this on your own and look at some of the arguments that the authors discuss. There are views in favor of it, of course. There are views that say, hey, look, if people lived 1,000 years, they would, when they're born and they knew about this life expectancy, they would have different ambitions, and they would plan their existence in a different way. There are also issues, of course, of overpopulation and things like that, and what would happen if the population everybody lived 600 years. How would that affect the economy, climate change, the environment? There's all kinds of issues related to this. And there are arguments in favor and against, remember, because it wouldn't be that you become old at 80, right? You would become old maybe at 373 years. So you would be actually very productive and in society. So in any case, I will stop with that at this point and let you, if you want to do this in your essay, if you want to discuss this issue, you need to go deeper into this in the text. The second one I want to do, and the last one for this lecture, first part of the lecture, is physical enhancement, and we're talking about basic things like strength and stamina, flexibility, agility, conditioning, even cosmetics. So looks, coordination, all of this kind of physical abilities. Now, again, what is normal and what counts as therapy and what counts as enhancement is a kind of blurry, there's a gray area around a lot of this. The big the big story here, of course, is the physical enhancements that take place in the athletic world, right, in professional sports. So we know one of the examples is, of course, the example of Ben Johnson, who won in the Olympics, I think it was the 100-yard dash, the 100-yard run. Later, he was found to have steroids in his system or some sort of drugs that enhanced his physical abilities. He was disqualified and he lost the gold medal. We know in professional sports like baseball, there has been all kinds of issues with steroid use, and all of this is illegal. So the question is it moral or immoral? There are, I think, two questions. One question is whether it is immoral in and of itself. All right, so is there something wrong with physically enhancing your abilities? It doesn't seem, it seems difficult to me to see why it would be wrong in and of itself, unless it was harmful for you or someone else. But that is one question. The next question is whether or not it is wrong within the context of professional sports. And in that context, there are different issues. There's the issue of fairness and rules and breaking rules, right? So I think it's not the physical enhancement itself, but rather the rule breaking that kind of is the problem. If it's illegal in a sport to do certain activities, whatever it is, right, to use your hands in soccer, or to use your feet in basketball, then doing so might give you an advantage, right? And the same thing goes for using any kind of drugs that would physically enhance your performance. If they're illegal and no one is allowed to use them, but somehow you use them and you get away with it, then it seems like the playing field is not even for everyone, right? Because some people then have an advantage. So I think, to me, it's clear that if it's illegal, then it should be immoral and unethical because it's unjust, because it's unfair. And that seems like a straightforward argument. The more complicated issue is whether or not it should be legal. And the authors present a very strong argument for why it shouldn't be illegal. And why, we should just open it up and let people use steroids and use whatever kind of medications that, they think would enhance their performance. Of course, if everyone did it, it would just raise sort of the competitive sort of edge would just kind of evenly be distributed, so no one really has an advantage in this case, right? It's not like in the case where nobody uses steroids, and then you have this one person who kind of uses it and has a competitive advantage. That would not happen, right? If everybody gets to explore and experiment with these physically enhancing drugs, I think the playing field would be even. And so we wouldn't have the issue of injustice or unfairness in sports. Now, there is the question whether or not this is, by the way, this is called what the authors, there's the terminology they use is a positional good. Positional good. If a medical procedure or a medication or a prescription drug enhances your performance and creates a positional good, it means it creates an advantage, a net good overall, right? And so in these kinds of cases, you're going to have serious ethical problems. Again, the question about making it legal and allowing everyone to use it raises the concern about whether or not this is something that we want to include in our conception of good sportsmanship, or within the spirit of sports in general. So I think that there are arguments there too against drugs, using prescription drugs and things that would enhance your physical abilities. The authors present a strong rebuttal to this argument, but I think there's another aspect which they have not considered in the article, which is, I think, the example that they set for for the general populations. You know, an argument could be made, right, that professional athletes in some ways are exemplary, and they are role models in many ways. And if they're all using these kinds of prescription drugs to enhance their capabilities, there is, I think we could raise some ethical issues about how this would affect, for instance, children who look up to them, and how it might affect the sports environment in general, right? You have now an environment where it's legal, and you know, all of these athletes are now actively participating in, you know, drugs, and it seems like there'd be more concerned about the improvement of the drugs, right, the pharmaceutical aspect of the sport, than training, right? So it seems like, hey, you know, there would be kind of a war, you know, a competitive war in coming up with the yet more advanced steroids and better performing kinds of drugs that they could sell to athletes. That would be sort of the focus, instead of waking up at 6, I'm going to wake up at 5 and run more so that I could be in better physical shape. So I think there is something serious. I think the authors missed that point a little bit. So it might be something interesting for you to investigate, because they seem to kind of encourage or endorse the view that we should open up drug use in professional sports. And that, to me, seems they haven't thought about the consequences of that completely. So I will end this first part of the lecture here, and I will talk about the other 3 kinds of enhancements: personality enhancement, cognitive enhancement, and enhancing our babies, offspring, the next generation. So I'll see you soon. Thanks.